When the call came, Eliza Morgan was elbow-deep in garden soil. Early October sunshine warmed her back as she worked methodically through the raised beds, preparing them for winter. The phone rang from inside her kitchen, its muffled tone barely audible over the rustle of dried stalks she was clearing away. She almost didn't answer it. Later, she would replay this moment in her mind. Her muddy hands, the garden's peaceful solitude, the last normal breaths before her life changed. She would remember the way the light dappled through the maple trees, casting gentle shadows across her weathered wooden garden boxes. She would recall the earthy scent rising from the soil as she turned it, the crisp autumn air filling her lungs. But something pulled her inside. Perhaps the unusual hour for a call, perhaps intuition. And she hurriedly wiped her hands on her jeans before picking up the phone. "Hello. Is this Elizabeth Morgan?" The voice was formal, unfamiliar. "Yes, this is she." Eliza leaned against the kitchen counter, her gardening gloves discarded beside the sink. "Ms. Morgan, I'm calling from Fairview Memorial Hospital. We have a patient here, Catherine Williams. She's listed you as her emergency contact." Eliza's brow furrowed. The name meant nothing to her. "I think there must be some mistake. I don't know anyone by that name." A pause. "She said you might say that. She asked me to tell you she's your mother." The kitchen seemed to tilt slightly. Eliza gripped the counter's edge, steadying herself. "That's impossible. My mother's name is Grace Morgan. She died 15 years ago." Ms. Williams was quite insistent. "She's in critical condition following a car accident and specifically asked for you. She has some personal effects, including documentation she says will explain everything." Eliza's mind raced. This had to be a scam, a cruel prank, or a case of mistaken identity. Her mother, her real mother, had been Grace Morgan, a quiet librarian who raised Eliza alone after her father abandoned them when Eliza was just 2 years old. Grace had succumbed to pancreatic cancer when Eliza was 22. There was no mystery there, no hidden identity. "I'm sorry, but there's been a mistake," Eliza said firmly. "She described you perfectly, Ms. Morgan. She knew you teach second grade at Westfield Elementary. She knew about the small birthmark behind your right ear." A chill ran through Eliza. The birthmark was hardly visible, hidden beneath her hair. Few people knew about it. "She's asking for you," the voice continued gently. "The doctors don't think she has much time." 30 minutes later, Eliza found herself walking through the sterile corridors of Fairview Memorial, her heart pounding in her chest. She had changed out of her gardening clothes into jeans and a simple blue sweater, her chestnut hair hastily pulled back into a ponytail. She felt utterly unprepared for whatever awaited her. The ICU nurse led her to a room at the end of the hall. "She's heavily sedated for pain," the nurse explained softly. "She may drift in and out. Try not to upset her." Eliza nodded numbly, then stepped into the room. The woman in the hospital bed looked nothing like Grace Morgan. This woman was taller, with high cheekbones and ash blonde hair streaked with gray. Machines beeped steadily around her, monitoring vital signs. Her face was bruised, one arm encased in a cast, and bandages wrapped around her chest. Even in this damaged state, there was an elegance to her that Grace, practical, modest Grace, had never possessed. Eliza approached cautiously, studying the stranger who claimed to be her mother. The woman's eyes fluttered open, startlingly blue eyes that seemed to pierce right through Eliza. "You came," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Who are you?" Eliza asked, remaining at the foot of the bed. "My Lizzie." A ghost of a smile crossed the woman's face. "You look just like your father." "My name is Eliza, not Lizzie. And my father left when I was a toddler. I don't look like anyone." The words came out harsher than Eliza intended. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "There's a bag." "My things." "The envelope." Eliza saw a plastic hospital bag on the nearby chair. With reluctant hands, she reached inside and found a sealed manila envelope with her name written on it in elegant script. "Open it," the woman urged. Inside was a bundle of documents. On top lay a birth certificate, Eliza's birth certificate, but not the one she had seen before. This one listed her mother as Catherine Elizabeth Williams, not Grace Morgan. Below that was a faded photograph of a younger Catherine holding a newborn baby, looking down with an expression of mingled joy and devastation. "I don't understand," Eliza said, her voice trembling. My mother was Grace Morgan. I have memories of her. A lifetime of memories. Grace was my cousin, Catherine whispered. She raised you as her own. It was what we agreed was best. Best for whom? The anger rising in Eliza's chest surprised her with its intensity. For you, Catherine said simply. I was 20 years old, unmarried, and your father. He wasn't ready. His family would have disowned him. Grace had always wanted a child but couldn't have one. So you just gave me away? Like I was nothing. Eliza's hand shook as she clutched the documents. You were everything, Catherine's voice broke. The hardest thing I've ever done was placing you in Grace's arms. I thought I was giving you a better life than I could provide. Does that help you sleep at night? Eliza asked bitterly. I haven't slept well in 37 years, Catherine replied, her eyes closing briefly in pain. I've watched you from a distance. Your graduation's hiding in the back. I came to your classroom once, pretending to be considering the school for a non-existent niece. I saw the Halloween decorations you made with your students. Eliza remembered that day 3 years ago, a blonde woman who had seemed oddly emotional during the tour. She had attributed it to the woman being moved by the children's artwork. Why now? Eliza demanded. After all this time, why reveal yourself now? I was coming to see you, Catherine admitted. I've been diagnosed with a heart condition. The accident happened on my way to your town. I didn't want to die without you knowing the truth. The truth, Eliza repeated hollowly. The truth is that my entire life has been a lie. Grace loved you as her own. That wasn't a lie. Catherine reached out a trembling hand. Please, Lizzie. I'm not asking for forgiveness, only understanding. Eliza stepped back beyond Catherine's reach. I need time. Time is the one thing I don't have, Catherine whispered. But Eliza was already backing toward the door, the documents clutched to her chest. I'm sorry. I can't do this right now. She fled the hospital room, ignoring the nurse's concerned glance. In her car, she sat with her forehead pressed against the steering wheel, trying to process what she had learned. The foundation of her identity had just been shattered. Who was she now? Not Eliza Morgan, daughter of Grace, but Elizabeth Williams, daughter of Catherine. A stranger dying in a hospital bed. The drive home passed in a blur. Inside her small cottage, Eliza spread the documents across her kitchen table. Besides the birth certificate and photograph, there were school records showing Catherine had been studying art in Paris when she became pregnant. There were faded letters between Catherine and Grace, arranging the adoption. And there was a journal, its pages filled with Catherine's elegant handwriting. Entries spanning 37 years, all addressed to my dearest Lizzie. Eliza read until her eyes burned, piecing together the story of her birth. Catherine Williams had been a promising young artist studying abroad when she fell in love with the son of a prominent American businessman. When she became pregnant, he panicked, unwilling to face his conservative family with an unexpected child. Catherine had turned to her cousin Grace, who had always wanted children but couldn't conceive. The arrangement seemed perfect. Grace would raise Eliza as her own, giving her stability and love, while Catherine would pursue her art career. Except Catherine had never gotten over giving up her child. The journal entries revealed years of pain, regret, and longing. She had become a successful artist with exhibitions in major galleries across Europe, but her accomplishments felt hollow. She had kept track of Eliza's life from afar, sending anonymous gifts on birthdays, watching school performances from the back row, forever the stranger. As midnight approached, Eliza closed the journal, emotionally exhausted. She thought of Grace, the woman who had raised her, who had read her bedtime stories, bandaged scraped knees, and guided her through life's milestones. Had Grace truly loved her? Or had she merely been fulfilling an obligation to her cousin? The memories flooded back. Grace's patient smile as she helped with homework, her unwavering support when Eliza decided to become a teacher rather than pursue a more lucrative career. The peaceful final days they had spent together as cancer slowly claimed Grace's life. There had been no deathbed confession, no hint that Grace was not her biological mother. Eliza poured herself a glass of wine and carried it to the window, looking out at her darkened garden. The life she had built felt suddenly precarious, as if it belonged to someone else. Yet she was still the same person, still a dedicated teacher who loved her students, still someone who found peace in tending her garden, still a woman shaped by both nature and nurture. As dawn broke, Eliza made a decision. She would return to the hospital. She didn't know if she could forgive Catherine for her abandonment, but she could at least listen. She owed that much to the dying woman who had given her life, even if she had not given her a home. But when Eliza arrived at the hospital, she was too late. Catherine Williams had suffered a massive heart attack in the early morning hours. She had died alone. The funeral was a small affair. Despite Catherine Williams' success in the art world, few people attended her memorial service. A gallery owner from New York spoke briefly about her contributions to contemporary art. A childhood friend shared memories of Catherine's determination and spirit. No one mentioned a daughter. Eliza sat in the back row, feeling like an imposter. She had not claimed a relationship to Catherine, had not corrected the assumption that she was merely a former student or admirer. She listened to strangers eulogize a woman she had met only once, trying to reconcile this accomplished artist with the biological mother who had given her away. After the service, the gallery owner approached her. "You must be Elizabeth," he said, extending his hand.
"I'm David Cohen."
"Catherine spoke of you often." Eliza accepted his handshake with surprise. "She told you about me?" "You were her greatest regret," David said gently, "and her greatest pride, though she felt she had no right to that pride." He handed her a business card. "There's the matter of her estate. Catherine left everything to you. Her apartment in Manhattan, her artwork, her investments. When you're ready, call me." Eliza stared at the card. "I barely knew her." "But she knew you," David replied. "She kept track of every accomplishment. The teaching award you won last year? She framed the newspaper article. Your garden was featured in a local magazine once. She had that framed too." The thought of Catherine secretly collecting pieces of her life was both touching and unsettling. "I don't know if I can accept her inheritance," Eliza said honestly. "It feels wrong somehow." "Take your time," David advised. "Catherine's apartment will keep. There's no rush to make decisions." 2 weeks later, Eliza found herself standing before an elegant pre-war building in Manhattan's Upper West Side. Using the keys David had provided, she entered Catherine Williams' home for the first time. The apartment was a reflection of its owner, sophisticated, artistic, with an underlying current of melancholy. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating walls covered with paintings. Some were Catherine's own works. Others appeared to be by friends or contemporaries. The furnishings were simple but elegant. A worn leather sofa, bookshelves lined with art volumes and novels, a grand piano in one corner. And everywhere, discreetly placed, were reminders of Eliza. A photograph of her graduating college, taken from a distance. A framed newspaper clipping announcing her teaching award. A collection of greeting cards, birthday cards, Christmas cards, Mother's Day cards, that Catherine had apparently purchased over the years but never sent. In the master bedroom, Eliza found a collection of small, exquisite paintings, all of a girl growing into a woman. With a shock, she recognized herself at various ages. A toddler playing in a park, a young girl in a school uniform, a teenager waiting at a bus stop, a college student crossing a campus quad. Catherine had painted her daughter from afar, capturing moments from a life she had glimpsed but never shared. On the bedside table lay a small, worn book of poetry. Inside the cover, a dedication was written in familiar handwriting. Grace's handwriting. "To Cat, with love always, Grace." Beside it was a photograph of 2 young women with their arms around each other, laughing at the camera. Grace and Catherine, perhaps 18 or 19 years old, before life had complicated their relationship. Eliza sank onto the bed, clutching the photograph. Grace had never mentioned Catherine, had maintained the fiction of being Eliza's biological mother until her death. Yet here was evidence of their closeness, their shared history. What had driven them apart? What had happened to transform this laughing friendship into a secret arrangement that shaped 3 lives so profoundly? The answer came in the form of a letter Eliza found in Catherine's desk drawer, dated just weeks before Grace's death. It was unopened, the return address in Grace's neat handwriting. With trembling fingers, Eliza broke the seal. "My dearest Cat, the doctors say I have little time left, and there are things I must say before I go. First, thank you for the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. Raising Lizzie has been the joy of my life. She has grown into a remarkable woman, kind, intelligent, with your artistic sensibility and your father's steady determination. I know we agreed never to tell her the truth, but I find myself questioning that decision as I face my mortality. She deserves to know her history, her heritage. She deserves to know you. I have kept my promise all these years, letting her believe she is entirely mine. Perhaps it was selfish. I feared losing her, feared she would turn from me to you once she knew. But she has a strong heart, stronger than either of us anticipated when we made our arrangement all those years ago. I release you from our agreement, Kat. When I am gone, if you wish to tell her the truth, you have my blessing. She may be angry at first. Our Lizzie has always had a fierce sense of justice, but in time I believe she will understand. You were right to stay away if that was what you needed. I was right to love her as my own. We have both done our best with impossible choices. I have enclosed a key to a safe deposit box at First National Bank. Inside are letters I have written to Lizzie over the years, explaining everything. I could never bring myself to give them to her while I lived, but perhaps they will help her understand after I'm gone. With eternal gratitude and love, Grace. Tears streamed down Eliza's face as she read and reread the letter. Grace had known she was dying, had contemplated telling the truth, and had ultimately left the decision to Catherine. And Catherine, receiving this permission from beyond the grave, had finally decided to come forward, only to be thwarted by fate's cruel timing. The safe deposit key was still in the envelope. Eliza clutched it, a tangible link to the mother who had raised her, who had loved her enough to share her with the mother who had borne her. At First National Bank, a manager escorted her to the vault. The box contained a bundle of letters, each marked with a date, milestones in Eliza's life. Her first day of school, her 16th birthday, her college graduation, her first teaching job. Each letter explained a piece of the story, revealed Grace's thoughts and feelings as she raised another woman's child as her own. My darling Lizzie, one letter began. Today you started kindergarten. You were so brave, marching into that classroom with your Wonder Woman lunchbox. I watched you through the window making friends immediately, completely at ease in this new environment. Catherine would be so proud of you. She was always fearless that way too. Another letter, dated on Eliza's 16th birthday, read, I almost told you today. You asked about your father, wondering if you had his eyes or his smile. I said what I've always said, that he left us and wasn't worth your thoughts. But the truth is more complicated. Your father was a young man named James Harrington. Catherine met him in Paris. He was handsome, charming, from a wealthy Connecticut family. When Catherine told him she was pregnant, he offered money but not marriage, not recognition. His family threatened to disown him if he threw his life away. As they put it, Catherine was devastated but determined to give you a better life than she could provide alone. I don't know if James ever thinks of you. Catherine thinks of you every day. The final letter had been written just days before Grace's death. My beloved daughter, for you will always be my daughter, regardless of who gave birth to you. As I face the end of my life, I am filled not with regret but with gratitude. You have been the greatest blessing, the greatest adventure, the greatest love I have ever known. I hope you can forgive the deception. Catherine and I thought we were doing what was best, giving you stability, a normal childhood, protection from the gossip and judgment that would have followed Catherine as an unwed mother in those days. Times have changed, but our decision was made in a different era. Catherine has sacrificed more than you can imagine to give you the life she thought you deserved. She has watched from a distance, loving you fiercely but respecting our agreement. If she comes to you someday, please listen. Please try to understand that sometimes love expresses itself in stepping away as much as in holding close. You are the product of two mothers who loved you in different ways. Catherine gave you life and artistic talent. I tried to give you roots, confidence, and unconditional love. Together, I hope we have given you wings. All my love now and always. Mom. Eliza sat in the bank's private viewing room, letters scattered around her, pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. She had been loved, deeply, completely loved, by two women who had made an impossible choice in different ways. Grace had chosen to raise another woman's child as her own. Catherine had chosen to step aside, watching her daughter grow from a distance, preserving the stability of the life Grace provided. There was grief in this knowledge, but also a strange comfort. She hadn't been abandoned. She had been placed in loving arms. Catherine hadn't forgotten her. She had watched over her from afar. Grace hadn't lied out of malice but out of a complicated love that encompassed both Eliza and Catherine. In the following weeks, Eliza divided her time between her cottage and Catherine's apartment. She took a leave of absence from teaching, needing space to process her new reality. She studied Catherine's paintings, read her journals, spoke with her friends and colleagues. Slowly, she built a picture of the woman who had given her life. A dedicated artist, a loyal friend, a woman whose talent was matched by her capacity for love and sacrifice. Among Catherine's possessions, Eliza found a sketchbook filled with drafts of letters never sent, birthday cards never given, notes of congratulations and comfort composed but never delivered. Catherine had maintained a one-sided correspondence with her daughter throughout the years, writing words she never shared. "My darling Lizzie," one entry read, "Today I saw you teaching. I stood outside your classroom window and watched you helping a little boy with his reading. You were so patient, so kind. You have Grace's gentleness. I'd like to think you have my passion too, but perhaps that's just wishful thinking. I'm so proud of the woman you've become, even though I had no hand in shaping you." Another entry, dated around the time of Grace's funeral, "I wanted to come to you today to hold you as you grieved for Grace. But what right do I have to comfort you? She was your mother in all the ways that matter. I saw you standing by her grave, so strong yet so vulnerable. I stayed hidden behind the oak tree, sending you love you couldn't feel, offering support you didn't know existed." The more Eliza learned about Catherine, the more complex her feelings became. There was anger still, anger at the deception, at the years lost, but it was tempered by understanding. She began to see Catherine not as the woman who had abandoned her, but as someone who had made an agonizing choice from limited options. One rainy afternoon, as Eliza sorted through Catherine's financial papers, she discovered something unexpected: regular payments made to Grace over the years. Not large sums, but consistent support that would have helped with Eliza's education, health care, extracurricular activities. Catherine had contributed to her daughter's upbringing from afar, supplementing Grace's modest librarian's salary. She found something else too: a series of small, anonymous scholarships Eliza had received throughout her education. One had funded her college textbooks. Another had covered her teaching certification expenses. These had come not from the institutions they appeared to represent but from accounts Catherine had established. "She never stopped being your mother," David Cohen told her when she called him with questions. "She just mothered you from a distance." "But why not come forward after Grace died?" Eliza asked. "I was an adult by then. I could have handled the truth." "She was afraid," David said simply. "Afraid you would hate her for giving you up. Afraid you would reject her. Afraid she would tarnish your memories of Grace." Catherine was fearless in her art but terrified of emotional rejection. The older she got, the more paralyzed she became by the fear of your reaction. As summer arrived, Eliza made a decision. She would keep her cottage but also maintain Catherine's apartment. She would take a sabbatical year, using the time to fully explore her newfound heritage. She would visit the places Catherine had lived and worked: Paris, Rome, Barcelona, following the footsteps of the mother she had never known. Before leaving, she visited Grace's grave, placing fresh flowers against the headstone. "I understand now," she whispered. "I understand why you kept her secret. I wish you had told me, but I understand why you didn't. Thank you for loving me so completely. You will always be my mother." Then she visited Catherine's grave in a different cemetery, placing an identical bouquet. "I'm sorry we didn't have more time," she said softly. "I'm sorry fear kept you away. I'm going to know you now as best I can. Better late than never." As she walked away from the cemetery, Eliza felt a strange sense of peace. She had not lost one mother and gained another. She had discovered that she had always had two mothers, one who had raised her with daily, tangible love, and one who had loved her silently, constantly, from afar. Paris in September was everything Catherine's journals had described: golden light on ancient stones, the Seine flowing like liquid silver beneath historic bridges, gardens transitioning from summer abundance to autumn elegance. Eliza rented a small apartment in the Latin Quarter, not far from the art school Catherine had attended in her youth. She had brought some of Catherine's journals with her, using them as a guide to the city her biological mother had loved. She visited the cafes where Catherine had sketched, the galleries where she had first exhibited, the parks where she had found inspiration. Sometimes Eliza would sit with her own sketchbook. She had begun drawing recently, curious about the talent she might have inherited, and try to see the city through Catherine's eyes. It was in one such café, Le Petit Oiseau, that Eliza experienced her first strange coincidence. She was attempting to sketch the ornate espresso machine behind the counter when an elderly Frenchman approached her table. "You have her hands," he said in accented English, gesturing to Eliza's fingers wrapped around the pencil. Eliza looked up, startled. "Excuse me, Catherine Williams," the man said, smiling gently. "You hold your pencil exactly as she did. I would know that grip anywhere. I was her drawing instructor many years ago." His name was Marcel Durand, 82 years old and still teaching occasionally at the École des Beaux-Arts. He had recognized not just Catherine's distinctive pencil grip but also something in Eliza's features, the set of her jaw, the intensity of her gaze. Over coffee, Marcel shared memories of Catherine as a young art student, brilliant, passionate, determined to make her mark on the world. "She was like a shooting star," he said, his eyes distant with remembrance.
So bright, so intense.
When she returned from her summer break pregnant, many thought her career was finished before it began. But Catherine was never one to surrender to conventional expectations. "Did you know she gave me up?" Eliza asked quietly. Marcel nodded, his expression somber. "She showed me your photograph once many years later. She said it was the hardest choice she ever made, but she believed you would have a better life with her cousin. The art world then was no place for a single mother struggling to establish herself. Was she happy?" The question had haunted Eliza since discovering Catherine's existence. In her life, in her career, did she find fulfillment? Marcel considered this. Catherine found recognition, respect, success by any external measure. But happiness? There was always a sadness in her, a space nothing could fill. He reached across the table to touch Eliza's hand. "I think that space was shaped like you." Through Marcel, Eliza met others who had known Catherine during her Paris years. Former classmates, models, gallery owners. Each had a different perspective on the complicated woman who had given Eliza life. Some described her as driven to the point of obsession, others as generous and fiercely loyal. All agreed she possessed extraordinary talent and a certain melancholy that infused her work with unique emotional resonance. One afternoon, Marcel took Eliza to a small gallery off the beaten path, where several of Catherine's early works were displayed. These were pieces Eliza hadn't seen before, raw, emotionally charged paintings from the period just after she had given up her daughter. "This one," Marcel said, indicating a particularly haunting image of a woman with empty arms reaching toward a distant light, won her first significant recognition. The critics called it a powerful meditation on loss and hope. Few knew it was a self-portrait of sorts. Eliza stood before the painting, feeling the ache it expressed. Catherine had channeled her grief into her art, transforming personal pain into universal emotion. The talent was undeniable, the emotional impact devastating. "She never stopped loving you," Marcel said gently, "but she believed her love was best expressed by letting you go." As autumn deepened in Paris, Eliza continued her journey through Catherine's past. She visited the small chapel where, according to journal entries, Catherine had prayed daily during her pregnancy. She found the park bench where Catherine had sat sketching the day she decided to give her baby to Grace. She located the tiny apartment where Catherine had lived as a student, now renovated but still bearing the same blue door described in the journals. In late October, Eliza traveled to Rome, following Catherine's post-Paris trajectory. Here, Catherine had experienced her first major success, selling out an exhibition that established her reputation in European art circles. The gallery still existed, now run by the son of the original owner. "Ah, Williams," he said when Eliza introduced herself, "one of our most memorable artists. Such passion, such technique. Are you a collector of her work?" "I'm her daughter," Eliza said, the words still strange on her tongue. The man's eyebrows rose in surprise. I didn't know she had a child. Few people did, Eliza replied. In Rome, she discovered more fragments of Catherine's life: the restaurants she had frequented, the church where she had sometimes attended Mass despite not being particularly religious, the scenic spots where she had set up her easel to capture the eternal city's light and shadow. It was in Barcelona, her third destination, that Eliza experienced the most profound connection to her biological mother. Catherine had lived here for several years in her 30s, during what critics considered her most innovative period. Her apartment had overlooked Gaudí's Park Güell, its fantastical architecture influencing the increasingly fluid, organic quality of her work during this time. Eliza rented a room in the same neighborhood, waking each morning to views similar to those Catherine had enjoyed. She visited the local market Catherine had written about, buying fruits from stalls that might have served her mother decades earlier. She found the small bar where Catherine had socialized with other expatriate artists, some of whose names Eliza recognized from art history books. At a small bookshop specializing in arts publications, Eliza discovered a collection of interviews with contemporary artists that included a lengthy conversation with Catherine. Reading her mother's words, thoughtful reflections on creativity, purpose, and legacy, Eliza felt an unexpected kinship. Catherine's perspective on art as both personal expression and communication with the wider world resonated with Eliza's own approach to teaching. The bookshop owner, learning of Eliza's connection to Catherine, invited her to dinner at his home. There, she met his wife, Carmen, who had modeled for Catherine during her Barcelona years. "She spoke of you," Carmen said over paella and wine. "Not often and never in detail, but I knew there was a child somewhere. A daughter she had given up." "How did you know?" Eliza asked. "Women know these things," Carmen said simply. "There was a day each year when she would not paint, would not see anyone. She would walk alone by the sea for hours. Later, I realized it must have been your birthday." The thought of Catherine marking her birthday with solitary grieving touched Eliza deeply. It complicated her understanding of her biological mother's absence. Not indifference, but a pain too private to share. As winter approached, Eliza returned to New York, her perspective transformed by the months spent tracing Catherine's life. She had filled sketchbooks with her own drawings, not masterpieces by any measure, but improving steadily as she explored the talent she seemed to have inherited. More importantly, she had begun to understand the complex woman who had given her life and then stepped away. In Catherine's Manhattan apartment, surrounded by her mother's artwork and books, Eliza faced a decision. The sabbatical year she had granted herself was half over. She could return to teaching, to her comfortable cottage and familiar routines. Or she could continue this journey of discovery, perhaps exploring Catherine's later years in Tokyo and Santa Fe. A letter arrived from David Cohen, Catherine's gallery representative. An important retrospective of Catherine's work was being organized by the Museum of Modern Art. Would Eliza consider writing a personal essay for the exhibition catalog? It would be the first public acknowledgement of Catherine's daughter, adding a dimension to the artist's biography that had been missing from previous scholarship. Eliza sat at Catherine's desk, her desk now, considering the request. She had been angry at first, then confused, then tentatively understanding. Now she felt ready to claim this part of her heritage, to acknowledge Catherine Williams not just as the woman who had given her away, but as the mother who had loved her from afar. She began to write. "I met my mother only once in a hospital room on the last day of her life. For 37 years, she had watched me from a distance, loving me silently, respecting the boundaries established when she placed me in another woman's arms. I was raised by her cousin Grace, who gave me stability, confidence, and unconditional love. I had a happy childhood, a secure foundation from which to build my life. What I did not have was knowledge of my origins, of the woman whose artistic talent and determined spirit I may have inherited." Catherine Williams made an impossible choice as a young woman, a choice to give her child a life she believed would be better than what she could provide. She channeled her grief and love into her art, creating works of extraordinary emotional resonance. The maternal absence that defined my understanding of family influenced her artistic vision in ways art historians may now begin to explore. The essay flowed easily, a daughter's perspective on an artist whose personal pain had informed her creative genius. Eliza wrote of Catherine's secret contributions to her upbringing, of the paintings documenting her growth from afar, of the love expressed through distance rather than presence. When the essay was published alongside the retrospective, it created a minor sensation in the art world. Critics re-examined Catherine's work through this new lens, finding maternal themes and explorations of absence they had previously overlooked. Interest in her paintings increased, prices rose at auction, and Eliza found herself fielding requests for interviews about the mother she had barely known. She declined most of these requests, preferring to maintain her privacy. But she did agree to give a talk at the museum, sharing selected journal entries and letters that illuminated Catherine's artistic process and personal journey. "My mother lived a life divided," she told the audience. "Part of her was dedicated to her art, to expressing universal human emotions through paint and canvas. Another part was forever connected to the daughter she gave away, watching from a distance, loving silently." These two aspects of herself, artist and mother, were not separate but intertwined. Her art was, in many ways, a conversation with a child she could not speak to directly. After the talk, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair approached her. Something in his bearing, in the set of his jaw, struck Eliza as oddly familiar. "Miss Morgan," he said formally, "I knew your mother many years ago. My name is James Harrington." Eliza felt a jolt of recognition. James Harrington, the name from Grace's letters, Catherine's journals. Her biological father. "I've followed your mother's career over the years," he continued, seemingly unaware of Eliza's shock. "She was a remarkable talent. I was sorry to hear of her passing." "You knew who I was," Eliza said, finding her voice. "All these years you knew Catherine had a daughter, your daughter." James Harrington's composed expression faltered slightly. "I was young," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Too young to understand what I was giving up. By the time I realized my mistake, Catherine had already given you to Grace. The arrangement was made. I was told it would be better for everyone if I stayed away." Eliza studied his face, searching for herself in his features. The set of his jaw, the shape of his eyes, these she recognized from her own mirror. Strange to see pieces of yourself in a stranger. "Better for everyone," she repeated. "Or better for you?" James winced. "I deserved that. I won't pretend my choices were noble. My family threatened disinheritance. I was completing my education. The timing was inconvenient." He said the last word with evident self-disgust. "I offered financial support, which Catherine refused." "Yet you kept track of her," Eliza observed. "You followed her career." "From a safe distance," he acknowledged. "Just as she followed you." They stood awkwardly amidst the crowd of art enthusiasts discussing Catherine's work, two people connected by blood, but separated by decades of silence. "Would you consider having coffee?" James asked finally. "There are things I'd like to tell you about those early days with Catherine. Things you might want to know." Eliza hesitated. Part of her wanted to reject him outright. This man who had participated in her abandonment, who had chosen family expectations over paternal responsibility. But curiosity won out. Here was another piece of her puzzle, another perspective on the complicated story of her origins. "Coffee," she agreed. "Just coffee." At a small cafe near the museum, James Harrington revealed himself to be both less and more than Eliza had imagined. Less monstrous than the callous young man described in Catherine's journals, but more complicated. A person who had made a cowardly choice at 22 and spent decades living with the consequences. "I saw you once," he admitted. "At your high school graduation. I was in town for business and knew from family connections where you had ended up. I sat in the back row, watched you accept your diploma. You were valedictorian." "You never made contact," Eliza said. "What right did I have?" James asked simply. "Grace had raised you. Catherine had sacrificed for you. I had contributed nothing. To appear in your life then would have been selfish. Another decision made for my benefit rather than yours." He showed her photographs from his wallet, his wife of 30 years, his 3 sons, his grandchildren. A conventional, privileged life built on the foundation of choices made in his youth. "I've had a good life," he said. "But there has always been a shadow over it, a road not taken. You are the embodiment of that road, Elizabeth." "Eliza," she corrected him. I go by Eliza. Eliza, he repeated, as if committing it to memory. Catherine wanted to call you Elizabeth after her grandmother. I preferred Sophia after mine. We argued about it the night before. Before I left Paris. Such a mundane detail, parents disagreeing over a baby name, yet it humanized the narrative Eliza had constructed. Catherine and James had not been merely characters in a tragic story. They had been two young people facing an unplanned pregnancy, having ordinary conversations about their child's future, even as that future slipped from their grasp. I have no expectations, James said as they finished their coffee. I'm not looking to insert myself into your life or claim a relationship I haven't earned. But if you have questions about your medical history, about my family background, about anything, I'm available. He gave her his card, James Harrington, managing partner, Harrington Capital Management. On the back, he wrote his personal cell phone number. The choice is yours, he said. Just as Catherine gave you to Grace, I'm giving you the power to decide what, if anything, comes next. As winter yielded to spring, Eliza continued processing her expanding understanding of family. Three parents now: Grace, who had raised her with daily love, Catherine, who had loved her from a distance, and James, who had absented himself but never quite forgotten. Each had made choices that shaped her existence for better and worse. She moved between her cottage and Catherine's apartment, gradually merging their possessions into both spaces. Catherine's art books on Eliza's shelves, Grace's quilts on Catherine's bed. She returned to teaching, finding renewed purpose in her classroom. The Catherine Williams retrospective traveled to museums across the country. Eliza attended several openings, sometimes speaking briefly about the personal dimensions of Catherine's work. Art critics began referring to specific paintings as belonging to the daughter period, identifying themes of separation, watching, and parallel lives in works spanning decades. James Harrington kept his word, maintaining a respectful distance. Eliza called him occasionally with specific questions. Was there a history of heart disease in his family? Yes, his father had died young of a heart attack. Did musical talent run through his lineage? His mother had been an accomplished pianist. These conversations remained formal, informational rather than emotional. Then in early summer, Eliza received an unexpected email from David Cohen. Eliza, while cataloging Catherine's early works for an upcoming auction, we discovered a series of letters in a hidden compartment of an old painting crate. They appear to be correspondence between Catherine and James Harrington during her pregnancy and immediately after your birth. Catherine apparently never sent most of them. As these are of a highly personal nature, I wanted to consult you before proceeding. The letters would undoubtedly be of interest to collectors and scholars, potentially increasing the value of Catherine's work. However, they contain intimate details about your origins that you might prefer to keep private. Please advise on how you wish to proceed. Respectfully, David. Eliza requested the letters be sent to her directly. When they arrived, a bundle tied with faded blue ribbon, she took them to her garden. Beneath the maple trees where she had been working when the hospital called about Catherine, she began to read. The letters revealed a more complex narrative than she had previously understood. Catherine and James had genuinely loved each other, planning a future together despite family objections. James had initially embraced the pregnancy, even proposing marriage. It was only when his family threatened not just disinheritance but professional destruction, they had connections that could ensure no reputable business would hire him, that he had wavered. Catherine's letters tracked her emotional journey from joy to devastation, from anger to resigned acceptance. James's responses, those he had actually sent, showed his struggle between family loyalty and personal desire, between financial security and emotional fulfillment. Most revealing were the letters neither had sent, Catherine's raw expressions of grief as she considered adoption, James's anguished apologies written months after he had returned to America. These unsent communications contained the truths they couldn't express to each other, revealing the depth of pain their separation had caused them both. After reading the final letter, Catherine's unsent announcement that she had given their daughter to Grace and would be traveling to Rome indefinitely, Eliza sat in her garden until twilight, processing this new information. The story was neither as simple as abandonment nor as noble as sacrifice. It was messier, more human. Two young people making flawed choices under difficult circumstances, living with the consequences for decades afterward. That evening, Eliza called James Harrington. "I've read the letters," she said without preamble. "The ones you and Catherine wrote during her pregnancy and after." A lengthy silence. Then, "I didn't know those still existed. Apparently Catherine kept everything. They were found in one of her storage crates." Another pause. "I'm not proud of how things ended between us." "That's not why I'm calling," Eliza said. "I'm calling because I think it's time we had a proper conversation. Not just about medical history or family background, but about everything. I have a more complete picture now, and I'd like to hear your perspective. Not the glossed-over version you think I want to hear, but the truth." They arranged to meet at Catherine's apartment the following weekend. In preparation, Eliza gathered photographs of herself growing up, of Grace, of the life Catherine and James had missed. She also collected Catherine's journals covering the period of her pregnancy, the small paintings she had created while carrying her child. When James arrived, he brought his own artifacts, letters Catherine had actually sent him, photographs from their time in Paris, a small sketch she had made of him sleeping that he had kept all these years. "I didn't stop loving her," he admitted as they spread these items across Catherine's dining table. "I just lacked the courage to choose her over my family's expectations. By the time I found that courage, it was too late. She wouldn't take my calls. My letters came back unopened." "Yet you never looked for me," Eliza observed. "I respected Catherine's decision," James said quietly. "She made it clear that my role in your life had ended before it began. And she was right. I had forfeited any claim to fatherhood when I left her to face pregnancy alone." Throughout the afternoon, they reconstructed the timeline of events that had led to Eliza's birth and subsequent placement with Grace. The narrative that emerged was one of young love overwhelmed by external pressures and internal fears, of immature decisions with lifelong consequences, of three lives forever connected yet diverging along separate paths. "I have 3 children I raised," James said at one point. "I was there for every milestone, every triumph and heartbreak. I coached baseball teams and helped with science projects and paid for college. I know what it means to be a father." He looked directly at Eliza. "And I know that's not what I was to you. Grace was your parent. Catherine, in her way, was your mother. I was just the man who contributed half my DNA," Eliza finished for him. "Yes," he agreed. "And while DNA matters, you have my eyes, my grandmother's musical ability apparently. It's not the same as parenting." As evening approached, James asked the question that had clearly been on his mind throughout their conversation. "Where do we go from here?" It was the same question Eliza had been asking herself for months. About Catherine's legacy, about Grace's memory, about her own identity. The answer came to her with surprising clarity. "Forward," she said simply. "We acknowledge the past without being defined by it. I'm not looking for a father figure. I'm 37 years old, my life is established. But perhaps there's room for connection, understanding, something new that honors what came before." James nodded, visibly relieved. "I'd like that." The summer Eliza turned 38, she organized a small private exhibition in Catherine's apartment. Not for the public or for critics, but for the handful of people who had become important in her journey of discovery. Marcel Durand, who flew in from Paris, David Cohen, who had managed Catherine's estate, Carmen and her husband from Barcelona, James Harrington and his wife, and several of Eliza's closest friends who had supported her through her exploration of her origins. The exhibition featured selected works by Catherine paired with Eliza's own emerging artistic efforts. Not direct copies but interpretations, conversations across time and space between mother and daughter. Alongside each pairing, Eliza displayed relevant excerpts from Grace's letters, Catherine's journals, or her own reflections, creating a narrative that honored all 3 perspectives. "I've titled this collection The Space Between Heartbeats," Eliza explained to her guests. "Because that's where I've existed all these years, in the pause between one mother's heartbeat and another's, in the silence between Grace's spoken love and Catherine's unspoken devotion." Marcel, now using a cane but still sharp-eyed, studied the pairings carefully. "You have her gift," he told Eliza. "Not just technique, that can be learned, but vision. You see beneath the surface just as she did." James Harrington circled the room slowly, taking in the visual representation of the daughter, he had never known and the woman he had once loved. His wife, Patricia, a gracious, silver-haired woman who had known about Catherine and Eliza for decades, squeezed his arm supportively. "Thank you for including us," she told Eliza privately. "James has carried this weight for so long. Seeing you whole and thriving, it brings a kind of closure neither of us expected." As the evening progressed, conversations flowed freely between these people connected by their relationship to Catherine Williams and by extension to Eliza herself. They shared stories, filled in gaps in each other's knowledge, laughed over previously unknown coincidences, like the fact that Catherine and Grace had both independently encouraged Eliza's interest in art as a child, one through direct guidance, the other through anonymous gifts of quality supplies. At one point, David Cohen raised his glass. "To Catherine," he said. "Artist, friend, mother. More complex and more human than any of us realized." "To Grace," Eliza added, "who gave love unconditionally and kept faith with both her daughter and her cousin." "And to Connections," James said, meeting Eliza's eyes. "Lost and found." After the guests departed, Eliza remained in the apartment surrounded by the visual record of her journey. The exhibition had been a culmination of sorts, a way to honor the past while creating something new from its fragments. But it also marked a beginning. The following week, Eliza submitted her resignation from her teaching position. She had been offered a visiting lectureship at the École des Beaux-Arts, Marcel's doing, teaching a course on the intersection of personal narrative and artistic expression. She would spend the next academic year in Paris, coming full circle to the city where her life had begun. Before leaving, she visited both Grace's and Catherine's graves one final time. At Grace's headstone, she placed pink roses, her mother's favorite, and whispered her gratitude for the unwavering love that had shaped her childhood. At Catherine's grave, she left a small stone from the garden of her cottage, a tangible piece of the life Catherine had watched from afar. "I understand now," she told both women, separated by miles but united in their love for her. "I'm the product of both your choices, Grace's choice to embrace, Catherine's choice to release. I'm carrying you both forward." Paris welcomed Eliza with golden autumn light, just as it had the previous year. But this time, she arrived not as a pilgrim seeking answers, but as a woman embracing the fullness of her heritage. Her students, aspiring artists from around the world, responded to her unique perspective on art as both personal expression and universal communication. Professor Morgan approaches creation as an act of integration, one student observed in a course evaluation. "She teaches us to honor our influences while finding our authentic voice. There's something profound in her methodology that goes beyond technique into the realm of identity and purpose." During school breaks, Eliza continued exploring Catherine's past, visiting places her biological mother had found meaningful in her artistic development. But she also created new memories, hiking in the French countryside, making friends among the faculty, developing her own relationship with the city that had witnessed her conception and earliest days. James Harrington visited once, bringing Eliza's half-brothers, successful professionals in their 40s, who had expressed cautious interest in meeting their previously unknown sister. The meeting was awkward but promising, opening the possibility of expanded family connections in the future. "They have your eyes," Eliza told James as they walked along the Seine afterward. "Or I suppose I have theirs, chronologically speaking." "Nature leaves its markers," James agreed, "but nurture shapes how we carry them." As her year in Paris drew to a close, Eliza faced another decision. The École had offered to extend her position, impressed by her teaching and the small exhibition of her own work that had garnered positive attention in local artistic circles. Alternatively, she could return to America, to her cottage, to Catherine's apartment, to the life she had temporarily set aside. On a bright spring morning, Eliza sat in Le Petit Oiseau, the café where she had met Marcel Duran the previous year. With her sketchbook open before her, she drew not the café's interior but from memory, Grace's gentle smile, Catherine's elegant hands, the garden behind her cottage in full summer bloom. On the facing page, she began sketching possibilities for the future. A studio space, a classroom, faces of students and friends, landscapes yet to be explored. Marcel found her there, joining her without ceremony. Now approaching his 84th birthday, he moved more slowly but his eyes remained sharp, missing nothing as he studied her drawings. "You're at a crossroads," he observed. I'm trying to integrate all the pieces, Eliza explained. Grace gave me roots. Catherine gave me wings. Now I need to decide where to plant those roots, how to use those wings. Marcel nodded sagely. Catherine faced a similar choice after you were born. Stay in Paris, surrounded by memories? Return to America, closer to you but bound by her agreement with Grace? She chose movement, believing art required new vistas, new experiences. And was she right? Eliza asked. For her, perhaps, Marcel said. Catherine needed physical distance to process emotional proximity. But you are not Catherine, just as you are not Grace. You must find your own path. That evening, Eliza wrote 3 letters, one to herself, one to Grace's memory, and one to Catherine's spirit. In each, she explored different aspects of her identity, acknowledging how each woman had contributed to the person she had become. To Grace, she expressed gratitude for stability and unconditional love. To Catherine, appreciation for artistic legacy and the courage of difficult choices. To herself, permission to create a future that honored both women while being distinctly her own. By summer's end, Eliza had made her decision. She would divide her time between continents, teaching half the year in Paris, spending the remainder in America where she could maintain her connections to both Catherine's and Grace's legacies. She would continue developing her own artistic voice while helping students find theirs. She would nurture the tentative relationship with James and his family without expecting it to fill emotional voids from the past. Most importantly, she would carry forward the love of 2 mothers, one who had raised her day by day, one who had watched over her from afar. Their choices, imperfect but made with the best intentions available to them at the time, had shaped her existence. Now her choices would shape whatever came next. On her 39th birthday, a milestone Catherine had marked with solitary walks by the sea, Eliza hosted a small gathering in her Paris apartment. Marcel was there, along with colleagues from the École and new friends made during her time in the city. They toasted her health, her work, her future. Later, alone, Eliza opened a special bottle of wine she had been saving. She poured 3 glasses, one for herself, one for Grace's memory, one for Catherine's spirit. To the space between heartbeats, she said softly, where loss and love, absence and presence, endings and beginnings all exist together. Where I found not just my history but myself. Outside her window, Paris continued its eternal dance of light and shadow. Inside, Eliza Morgan, daughter of Grace, daughter of Catherine, product of James, but ultimately her own creation, raised her glass to the complexity of love, the legacy of choices, and the infinite possibilities that lay ahead in the continuing rhythm of heartbeats, both remembered and real. 5 years later, Eliza stood in the center of a major gallery in New York, surrounded by her first significant solo exhibition. Titled Inherited Light, the collection represented her fully matured artistic voice, works that acknowledged Catherine's influence while being distinctly her own in style and substance. Art critics noted the genetic conversation, apparent in her paintings, the way she had absorbed Catherine Williams' technical brilliance while developing her own thematic concerns. Where Catherine's work had often explored separation and longing, Eliza's focused on integration and wholeness, depicting the beauty of pieced-together identities and reconciled narratives. The exhibition catalog included an introduction by Marcel Durand, now in his late 80s but still lucid and insightful. In the history of art, we occasionally witness the miracle of inherited talent, finding its own unique expression. Elizabeth Morgan has not merely stepped into her biological mother's shoes, but has charted her own artistic territory. Her work honors Catherine Williams' legacy while transcending it, demonstrating that artistic DNA, like personal identity, is not destiny but possibility. James Harrington attended the opening with his entire family, wife, sons, daughters-in-law, grandchildren. Over the years, these tentative connections had deepened into genuine relationships. Eliza would never see James as a father figure, but she had come to value him as a friend and appreciate the extended family that had unexpectedly entered her life. "You've done something remarkable here," James told her as they stood before the exhibition's centerpiece, a triptych depicting 3 women at different stages of life, their forms interconnected through subtle brushwork and shared color palette. "You've transformed absence into presence." "I've had good teachers," Eliza replied. Her life had found its rhythm. Autumns and winters in Paris teaching at the École, springs and summers in America maintaining her cottage garden, and developing her own work. She had published a memoir, Mothers and Other Strangers, exploring her unique family story without sentimentality or bitterness. Most importantly, she had made peace with her complex origins. Grace remained her mother in the deepest sense, the woman who had shaped her daily life, whose values and love had formed her character. Catherine had become a presence rather than an absence, a mother who had loved differently, but no less profoundly. And James had found his proper place in her narrative. Neither villain nor hero, but a flawed human whose choices had affected her life without defining it. On the night of her exhibition opening, after the crowds had departed and only gallery staff remained, Eliza took a private moment before her triptych. In the central panel, the three female figures, representing Grace, Catherine, and herself, formed a circle, their hands joined despite the different planes they occupied in the painted space. "We made it," she whispered to both her mothers. "All of us together in our way." Outside, New York continued its restless pace. Inside, in the quiet gallery surrounded by her work, Eliza Morgan stood complete, daughter of Grace and Catherine, artist in her own right, a woman who had discovered that identity exists not in singular definition, but in the integration of all our inherited and chosen parts. The space between heartbeats, she had learned, was not empty silence, but the pause that connects one moment of life to the next, the brief, sacred interval where past and future touch, where separate pulses align into the continuous rhythm of a life fully lived and fully owned. As she turned to leave, the gallery lights caught the subtle signature in the corner of the triptych, E. Morgan Williams, a name that honored all her origins while claiming her unique place in the world.